Hello, and thanks for listening. And I recently was looking at some of the developments of the border wall issue, and I thought it was also important to bring out the fact that a lot of people, when they talk about immigration, they talk about El Muro, the border wall issue. They bring up racism, they bring up Donald Trump's sentiment towards Hispanic and Latino communities. And contrary to what people have been saying, there were Hispanics and Latinos and Mexican people that voted for Trump. And I thought that was important to bring out because some of the same issues, and I'm going to use Black America and Black people as a comparison. Some of the same issues that Black people or just people in general from your own cultures, when you have classism and discriminations, or you have differences of opinions based on political issues and politics. You can be from the same neighborhood, from the same background, or have grown up from the same culture. But if one acquires a different citizenship, or they were born in America and they weren't born in Mexico, maybe their parents were born in Mexico, or maybe their grandparents were born in Mexico and their Mexican grandparents or parents were immigrants, and they acquired citizenship through the necessary legal channels in America to become citizens, and then they have children, and those children are born Mexican American. A lot of times you'll have Mexican American people who have citizen and legal status and citizenship here who are Protestant and in opposition, as well as Latino communities and other Latin communities in America that are American Latin communities that are oppositional about immigration as well, and they will fight against immigration, and they voted for Trump. They, as in Mexican American or Latino American peoples, or Hispanic American people. And I don't know if you were looking at the campaign trail. I'm sure many people were looking at it. Sometimes people don't have time to look at all of that, or they don't really see all of the people who really participated in the voting of Donald Trump. And if you paid attention to any of the articles, there were some people who voted for Donald Trump who also weren't citizens, and they were deported. And I, I was just as baffled as the next person who would ask this question. Why would you vote for someone who would impose these laws where they're basically ripping you away from your families, and they're deporting you, and the laws are going against you? So I want to add in here again, I'll say this and I'll repeat this from a previous video, that immigrants are not just only Hispanic, Latin, and Mexican people. They're anyone that comes from another country and they don't have citizenship in America. And you can be from another culture that isn't of Latin culture and be an immigrant. And a lot of people will argue with you and debate and say that most people in America are immigrants originally. It's not really their homeland, but legally, people who are here and who have been born here and who have all they've known is America, and that would qualify them to be legal U.S. citizens and residents of America. So And that also includes Mexican American, Latino American, Hispanic American, and anybody else that is from any other country that was born here originally. Maybe your culture is from another country, is what I'm trying to say, or your parents were from another country, but you as an American citizen, you're born here originally. So that is the conflict that has happened, and so it's a pretty really really sensitive subject and a complicated subject. It's very complicated and controversial. So I know people saw the Fox News. They have a habit of, always being very controversial and always being very pivotal when it comes to politics, and bringing a lot of people eye-opening headlines that baffle people or upset people and make people enraged, sometimes wanting to rebut and debate a lot of political issues that go on in American government and society. So there was a guy, he's Mexican, and I believe, if I recall, he said that he wasn't born here in the US, but he somehow acquired his citizenship. But he said some things, and he himself was Mexican, said some things that were very, very, very stereotypical, and I'm not even going to repeat them, but he mentioned trucks, and that before long there's going to be trucks on every corner. So I'll just say that part. I'm not going to say the other parts because it just seemed really vicious. But it has gotten violent. It has gotten vicious. Donald Trump has plenty of enemies. And it's not just on foreign soil either. It's even right here in America, where people who are American citizens are not really for Trump. So I just thought that it was important to get that out, because I think some people are confused and they think that certain groups are targeting Mexican immigrant people, and it's only other groups that aren't Mexican, and they don't realize that this is a lot bigger than what people know. And I'll say this, that there are people that have come from other countries and they went through the necessary steps to get their citizenship or dual citizenship or however they applied, and they had to take a test and be sworn in and go through all of the channels to become citizens of the US. And so I believe that those groups of people who have legal citizenship will also rally together and fight against those who don't have citizenship. And they also are discriminated, and they see the political problems, issues in terms of jobs and resources here in the U.S. So you'll have a lot of people who are actually from the same background. They just, either they weren't born in Mexico, or they were born in Mexico and they came here and they got legal status and they went through the necessary channels to get citizenships. That's Latinos and Mexicanos and anybody in the Hispanic culture. And I wanted to add that there are, in Latin culture, Hispanic, Mexican, there are Republicans as well. So if you paid attention to the Republican Party and the people that were up there, Marco Rubio was one of them, and there were some others that represented the Hispanic or the Latin community. I believe Bush, one of the Bushes was, his wife is Mexican, and he spoke Spanish, and he sort of was an advocate for the Mexican community, but he dropped out of the race like way earlier on, during the time that the campaign um, trails were up and running. And so I wanted to go into also an issue that I noticed because I had seen some videos where this Mexican woman was arguing with other Mexican people over, you know, in a political issue of being a Minutemen supporter. So I'm gonna read a little bit of this. This this one is a little much older. It was 2005, June 27th in the summer. It said Minutemen, other anti-immigrant militia groups stake out Arizona border. So see, this is a lot bigger than what people realize. And I don't think people realize that there were more involved in this than what they know. That it isn't just other groups or white people only, or, some people will even use blacks. They'll say, oh, blacks are targeting the immigrants, or the whites are targeting the black Americans, and the white Americans are targeting, and that is not true. It's bigger than what people realize. Now, here it says the predominantly Hispanic towns of Douglas and Narco are connected by the aptly named border road, a 20-mile stretch of rocky dirt that runs parallel to a ragged barbed wire fence separating the U.S. from Mexico, as you see here. So you have these people who are like militias, and sort of like, the night of April 3rd, armed vigilantes, they camped along the border road in a series of watch posts set up for the Minutemen Project, a month-long action in which revolving cast of 150 to 200 anti-immigration militants party wearing cheap plastic undocumented border patrol agents badges mobilized in the southeastern Arizona. Their stated goal was to do the job our government refuses to do. So basically, they were taking up arms, and they had guns, and they were trying to keep out people who they felt were crossing the border illegal, illegally. So that's just one article right there. And then I saw something where it mentioned Mexican border Minutemen, 3,500 to U.S. Mexican border, calling all people who want to volunteer. And I thought that was something that people should probably look at, that we have people who, I don't know if you've seen this in movies where you have these guys dressed up, they have guns, and they're dressed up like they have badges, and like they're patrolling the border and keeping people out. So this is sort of a glimpse of how they look when they're at the border and they're trying to keep people out because they feel like the government hasn't done their job of patrolling the border and keeping illegal people who are not getting citizenship and not doing things the legal way, keeping them out. And then there's also been the issues of diseases and different things, people that have illnesses, and they're crossing the border and they're bringing whatever other issues that maybe the issues they had from their home country, and hadn't had a looking into, whether it be health issues, criminal past, and those are some of the issues that people are fearing that is coming. And then the poverty, like if a person is crossing and they don't have citizenship and they need, government assistance, they need, they need housing, they need lodging, they need food, they need health care, that our taxpayer dollars are paying for that. So those are the issues that have come. I'm just merely stating those are the complaints of these individuals, and I'm not saying that it isn't true, but I'm not saying that put it this way. I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree on these issues. I'm just basically putting the information out there that there's more to this whole issue than what people know. And a lot of times people like to point the fingers at who's the ones that are doing the discriminating. But there are people who you wouldn't even believe, that you would think they wouldn't discriminate. They are discriminating, and they themselves are from the same culture. So, like I said earlier, I believe that money is involved in it. And where that comes in at is like what I just kind of spieled out when I talked about like the healthcare, the government assistance, and what have you. And for the longest, African Americans have dealt with similar issues on being told, oh, you're all on welfare and you're bleeding the system. You need to get a job. You're not trying hard enough. And, you have black people who are, elite, and they have money and they're doing better, and they'll discriminate black Americans who maybe they're not making as much money and they don't have the same education, and they need more assistance. And you have instances where that happens. And it happens, I'm sure, in every other culture, where you'll have white people who they are thriving and they may be doing a lot better economically, and you'll have white citizens who maybe they're not making a lot of money and they're not making a lot of progresses as people would believe they are, simply because of skin color. They feel that they have an advantage, and because of the social status quo. That is not always the case for every white American. So these are the things that I'm bringing out as facts, that a lot of times people will discriminate one another from the same backgrounds, and they don't realize that everybody hasn't had the same advantages as one would think. So, and there could be a multitude of reasons why people's situations are different than others. Somebody might be having a little more harder time economically than their brother-in or sister-in or whatever, and maybe they didn't have it as easy. So you have that in I believe this can happen in every culture, because you have, hierarchies, and it has become an issue now where it is all centered around money, where it's the wealthy versus the not wealthy, or not so fortunate, or not, in power, the ones in power and the ones who aren't in power. And so that's where Bernie Sanders brought up the whole ideology of the 1% elites versus the 99%. And you have a larger group now, and they're saying that the median or to upper class, middle class is dwindling, and you're going to have like the really, really, really small percentage of the top elites that are in power and have wealth, and then the larger number of groups of people who are struggling to make ends meet, small business owners and what have you. It's not really, really, you're just really living paycheck to paycheck. You're just getting by, and you're just doing the best that you can with what you have. And even if you're living, say, like on a somewhat semi okay income, you still may not be living comfortably, because a lot of times people, when they are able to make more money, you are able to acquire more things, or more material items, or more things that you consume, or that you buy, or you need, or you're utilizing. So you live sometimes beyond your means, and it's still as if you're still struggling. So you have this graph here of the welfare issue. And so that's why I said it's always centered around money. And I believe that's what this big thing is that when people, almost always, when you have people who are complaining about their tax dollars and where is it being spent, and if the problems are not being solved or not being fixed, they almost always will zero in on welfare. Who's on welfare, and who's using all the welfare. And with blacks, it was always blacks were always targets. Even still, blacks are targets for, comments on poverty and welfare and government assistance programs and what have you, and affirmative action. We've dealt with that decades, many decades over, and years and years and years. We've always dealt with issues like that. And so you'll almost always have people that will use this as a platform to attack those who aren't empowered and who don't have a voice, or who are in a vulnerable state of position economically, under foot and toe. And so whenever you need something from someone, you're always attacked. And if you have some people who really are using things to an advantage to do better in life, and they're not criminal activities going on and what have you, and they are achieving things and they are making strides, then you have a percentage of folks who aren't doing the right things, or who are just basically like they can't get ahead because maybe there could be a number of reasons. There could be mental issues, there could be a lack of education, and or maybe there could be health issues. Maybe they're at an age where they can't really go back to work, or if they work, they're not going to make that much money anyways because of age. Some people, when they start to age, are sort of thrown out of the work world and looked at as, we don't want the liability if this person hurts themselves or they get sick on the job, or we don't want to be responsible. And some employers will tell you that, even with people who are younger, they will tell you we don't want to be responsible in their own way. You have to read the fine print. So this wall thing, you're still going to be paying as a taxpayer. Like I said, Donald Trump, he has a rift between the Mexican president and then himself with who's going to pay for the wall. So a lot of taxpayers here in the U.S. are disgruntled because they realize that they're the ones going to be paying for the wall. But I also want to put this out there, that I believe that is why there's a lot of deportations happening, even to people who aren't with a criminal past. And because there's this disagreement on who's going to foot the cost of the wall being built, that this is why people who don't have a criminal past are being targeted. If there's a speculation of that happening, they say that's not happening, but we've seen recently there was a young lady who had stayed in LA for about 22 years. She has daughters, and she has no real criminal history, not here, and I would assume not in her own home country, but she was what you call lower on the radar in terms of, having a criminal history and not having a criminal history. She didn't have a criminal history, but she was one that was selected to be deported. So there was a protest very, very recently. There was a protest on her behalf, and she stated that she was going to try to make her way back so she could see her daughters. Her daughters are legal because they were born here. But if she wants her daughters to join her, then her daughters have to go back with her, or they have to meet her at the border and visit her. So it's sad. So that's the whole thing that has a lot of people up in arms, because they're ripping apart families. So it's pretty serious here, and I don't think people realize the seriousness of all of this, and how this sends a bad taste in the mouth of individuals. This pulling families apart and jousting, and then people going in people's homes and raiding and just snatching. And then there's the whole issue with ISIS, the immigration officers, on how they handle individuals when they apprehend them. Now, some situations may be dangerous, but if they're not dangerous situations, why does that give a license for people to be abusive and manhandle people? if they're going to implement deportation. So here we have a young lady by the name of Omarosa. She used to be married to the guy from the Green Mile, Michael Clark Duncan, I believe his name is. He was in a series of movies. Is very well known in the black community. And Omarosa, she is supposed to be under Donald Trump's cabinet, and she has a role in from what it is, I'm not really familiar. But anyway, this is Michael Clark Duncan, and Omarosa was the fiance of Michael Clark Duncan. If you watch The Green Mile, Tom Hanks was in that movie. It was an excellent movie. Um, but anyway, I have to read a little bit about her. So, with the black community, we have people who are Republicans. We have many Republicans. So, Omarosa is a Republican. She was the former villainous entrepreneur on The Apprentice show with Donald Trump. And she has said a lot of real controversial statements in regard to Donald Trump. President-elect Donald Trump is busy building his administration with his transition team in place. It looks like a throwback from The Apprentice is going to happen because Omarosa Mandigault, a previous contestant from season 1, is going to work on the Trump public engagement. Omarosa Mandigault was considerably one of the most controversial contestants on The Apprentice. She was accused of blindsiding, alienating, and who could forget her acrimonious tactics on the show. She was tagged as the woman America loved to hate. Now she is allegedly going to be one of the 9 members that will comprise of President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet, as reported by the Associated Press. This is no strange thing, as Omarosa was one of Trump's most vocal African American supporters during his presidential campaign. So there's a video on that, so I'm not going to go any further. I'll give you the article on that. Also, people are not aware that Martin Luther King was a Republican supporter. Now, this was back when there was a history. See, the first black congressman, all Republican, elected while Democrats were forming the KKK. So there was a history where Democrats were sort of on the other side. It was we-wopped, switched, where it was looked at as Democrats were more villain and they were supporters of KKK, and Republicans were more, more the easier going political party to be a part of, is in terms of black America. So you see Charles Barkley, he's said some controversial statements regarding poor people. Stacey Dash, who can't forget her, and she was like the spokeswoman, Republican spokeswoman for Donald Trump, and she was recently fired. And there was a firestorm on Twitter, Black Twitter is what we call it in the black community, where a lot of people were kind of glad to see her fired. Now, I'm using these people as an example. There are other people here that you see that still are black Republicans. Although these people are black, not all black people are for these people and agree with their statements and comments and their political views. So there's also a social divide within the black community among other people in terms of government policies and political views. So I want to make that clear, because some people assume that all black people are friends, all black people come from the same place, they all agree on the same issues, and that is not true. As we see, it says it was so painfully clear that Fox News was using Stacey Dash as a pawn. Anyone could see that the only reason they wanted her on the show was so that they could have a black face promoting their narrow-minded and racist-leaning interest. They believed her mere presence would prove that they weren't racist, and to convince, in other words, a couple of black folks to vote for Mitt Romney and then Donald Trump. So I'll just leave it at that. That's just a snippet of that article. So you see, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of social divides, even within cultures. There's infighting, even on political fronts, on all political fronts. So I thought that was something that should be brought to the forefront as well. So not all black people are in agreement with Donald Trump and his policies and his political views and position, even though you'll see there's some, it's the same thing, just like there's some Mexican or Latino Republicans, and then there's Mexican and Latino Democrats, and the same thing as in the black community, there's black Republicans and then there's black Democrats. So it's the same thing. And then even in the gender, there are women that are not for Trump, and you'll see that there's some women that are for Trump. He was trying to clear up some of the statements and some of the things that were derogatory that he said towards women, and then that grab him in the what comment that kind of sent a lot of females over the edge. So here you see also in a protest of anti-Trump, which is, we are indigenous, the only owners of the continent. Now, somebody could look at that and view that as being racist, because what it's saying is that when you say we are indigenous, nothing wrong with that, the only owners of this continent, it sounds like you don't want anybody else to control this. It's just about your culture. So somebody can flip that around. So there's a lot of people, a lot of social divide, a lot of anger, a lot of discriminating, even within cultures and even within, political views. So I just thought those things were interesting. But a lot of this boils down to power, money, and greed and politics. That can happen in any culture.